Here on the show, one of our main topics is often the relationship between Israel and the diaspora. It's no secret that this relationship has been a close one over the years, but one that has also seen its share of disagreements, especially during this past year, which has seen a growing friction between Israel and Jewish communities, especially the US Jewish community. Oftentimes, this relationship is viewed from the prism of diaspora Jews, but this raises the question, how do Israelis view their relationship with the diaspora? Here to discuss the special relationship between Israel and the US Jewish community is Kalman, Program Officer at the Ruderman Family Foundation, which works to bridge the gaps between Israel and the US Jewish community. Welcome.
Hi, Lidar.
So, Aaron, we have a lot of topics to cover today, but let's start with the Diaspora Torch. The Ruderman Family Foundation was very critical of the culture minister's decision to cancel the torch. Why was this such an insult to the US Jewish community?
So I think we need to start by saying it was taken as an insult, and then in the same breath say thank you to Minister Regev, who took a step back and reinstated it. It was seen as an unnecessary move, the sole purpose of which was to remove the diaspora representative from the table. And like I said at the beginning, the fact that after only 3 days, the minister agreed to reinstate that torch shows that it wasn't something she was willing to fight for. It was done more or less, in my opinion, because she wasn't thinking at the time, or someone on her staff who made the recommendation wasn't thinking at the time. They thought it would go unnoticed. They didn't realize what they were doing had a very symbolic meaning to the Jews outside of Israel. And when they were made aware, they reinstated the torch, which is the right thing, because at the end of the day, the state of Israel is a joint project of all the Jews in the world. It has been for over 70 years. It needs to be for the next 70 years. And the only way to keep it a joint project is if you give one symbolic space at a symbolic ceremony to the Jewish people.
Now, a poll released by the Diaspora Affairs Ministry this week and covered by the Jerusalem Post found that most Israeli Jews believe Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu should consider diaspora Jews. And the Ruderman Family Foundation also released a poll recently, right, that found similar statistics. And so I have to ask, is the Israeli government oblivious, perhaps, especially given this Diaspora Torch incident, to the importance of the relationship between the two communities?
I don't think the government's oblivious. I'd say we see a few different trends, and they're parallel trends. The first one, which we can see in both the polls you mentioned, is that the overwhelming majority of Israelis think at the moral level. Okay, so the Ruderman Family Foundation showed that 95% of Israelis at the moral level believe Israel has an obligation to diaspora Jewry. And then there's another trend, which is how active do you want to be in supporting that? So the polls show that between 2/3 to 3/4, depending which poll you look at, of Israeli Jews think that the government of Israel should take active steps to strengthen that relationship. Steps like funding Birthright, funding Taglit, taking other projects that bring diaspora Jews and Israelis together in conversation and dialogue. All of those things need to happen. So that's one trend. The second one is, who do Israeli politicians take into consideration when they make their decisions? And here I think it's very clear that the Israeli politicians, and I have to say, to an extent, rightfully so, look at the Israeli taxpayers, the Israeli voters, the Israeli citizens before they look outside. And I can understand that, because as an Israeli taxpayer, I want to make sure that I'm taken care of. And I can understand why politicians prioritize domestic affairs over the whims and wants and wills of Jews overseas. We've seen that in a whole bunch of examples. We saw that with the backtracking from the Kotel Compromise, the Western Wall Compromise a year and a half ago, when domestic political pressure by the ultra-Orthodox Haredi parties made the government retract its initial commitment to the compromise there, and we see it in other things. That said, I don't think that the government is oblivious towards it. I think they're aware of it. You see the numbers show that some Israelis are pleased. It's interesting to see who they want to lead the relationship, whether it's people like the Prime Minister, whether it's people like his political opponents, Benny Gantz, Yair Lapid. But the politicians know the relationship is important. The question is, do they listen to someone who can't vote for them over someone who does vote for them? That, I think, is an obvious answer.
Okay, so we're looking at the Israeli side of the equation, but what about in the United States? The Jewish community there is undergoing a bit of an upheaval. It seems more torn than ever. Is this also contributing to the friction, let's say, between the two countries?
I'm sure it's contributing to the friction between the two countries. I'd say the following. There's give me 1 second to explain. Last night, I was at a panel we organized with a few other organizations where 7 politicians from 7 parties explained how their parties view the relationship with the diaspora. And one of the politicians, Stav Shafir from the Labour Party, spoke about her travels around the US and her encounter with the minority of Jews who support BDS or who don't actively support BDS. And in her words, she said this was hurting both the Jewish community and its relationship with Israel. And I think that that's something that needs to be said out loud, which is in Israel, there is a wide plethora of opinions. There are many, many parties. Last night we had 7 represented at the evening. And American Jews could, in theory, identify with any one of those, from Likud and the New Right on one hand to Labor, Meretz on the other hand, everything in between. However, when some, and again, it's a minority of the American Jewish community, actively choose to side with organizations who are viewed as non-consensual and not part of the tent by any Israeli party on the Zionist spectrum, they alienate themselves. Now, that tension is visible both within the American Jewish community. If you speak to American educators, to rabbis, to parents, to students on campus, they're debating that between themselves. And of course, that debate affects their relationship with Israel. As someone once said, if you're not proud to be Jewish, then it's very hard to see why you'd want to affiliate with Israel. And if there's a friction going on within that community, it affects what happens here. And the Israelis sometimes view the minority, like I think we've discussed in the past, of noisy pro-BDS Jews who are viewed as anti-Israel, anti-Zionist, and they mistakenly think that reflects the American Jewish community. And of course, then that plays a factor in multiplying the noise and the volume and making it even worse than it should be.
And that's why the Ruderman Family Foundation's work is very important. Aaron, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thank you.